I am Camille, 35 years old, and a self-made tech founder living in a wealthy suburb of Atlanta. I stood in the shadows of my own hallway holding my breath as the baby monitor application loaded on my phone. I had only slipped back inside to retrieve a forgotten encrypted hard drive, but what I heard through that tiny speaker paralyzed me completely. "She is finally out of the house," my husband Kendrick laughed into his phone. "File the psych evaluation papers on Monday morning. Once we commit her for postpartum psychosis, I get full custody of Leo and total control of her accounts. Her entire business will be ours." I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply locked my phone and smiled. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever let someone dig their own grave while they thought they were digging yours. Our life in Atlanta looked like something pulled straight from the pages of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Kendrick and I lived in a massive brick estate surrounded by old oak trees and manicured landscaping. To the outside world, we were the ultimate power couple. I had built a highly successful cybersecurity logistics company from the ground up, relying on nothing but my own brilliance in code and data architecture. Kendrick played the role of the incredibly supportive, handsome husband who managed his own vague investments while cheering me on. We had just welcomed our beautiful baby boy Leo into the world 1 year ago. Every morning felt like a blessing, or so I believed. That Tuesday morning began just like any other perfectly orchestrated day in our household. The Georgia sunlight was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our kitchen as I rushed around trying to finalize my travel plans. I was scheduled to fly out of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport for a crucial 3-day tech conference in Chicago. Kendrick was standing by the marble kitchen island, holding Leo on his hip, while expertly flipping pancakes. He looked like the picture of domestic bliss. He poured my coffee into a travel mug, handed it to me, and pressed a warm kiss to my forehead. He looked deep into my eyes with an expression I completely mistook for genuine concern. "You look exhausted, baby," he said softly, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "This conference is going to drain you. Make sure you get some rest in your hotel room. I worry about your mental health working these long hours. You have seemed so overwhelmed since Leo was born." I smiled tiredly, leaning into his touch, completely oblivious to the trap he was actively laying right in front of my face. I thought he was just being an overprotective and loving husband. I kissed his cheek, kissed Leo on his soft little forehead, and grabbed my suitcase. I promised to text him as soon as I landed in Chicago, and walked out the front door feeling guilty for leaving my family behind, even for just a few days. The drive toward the airport was typical Atlanta morning traffic, a slow crawl of brake lights and honking horns. I used the time to mentally review the presentation I was scheduled to give on advanced data encryption. About 10 minutes down the highway, a sudden jolt of panic hit my chest. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what I had done. In my rush to pack my presentation clothes and say goodbye to the baby, I had left my encrypted hard drive at home. This was not just any flash drive. It contained highly sensitive proprietary code for my cybersecurity software files I absolutely needed for my keynote address. I vividly remembered placing it on the top shelf of the nursery closet the night before, hiding it safely behind a stack of baby blankets so it would not get misplaced in the chaos of packing. Cursing my own forgetfulness, I took the next exit and navigated my car back toward our neighborhood. I knew Kendrick had mentioned hosting several contractors that morning to discuss a major kitchen and patio remodel we were planning. I did not want to disrupt his meetings or deal with the hassle of moving contractor trucks around in our long circular driveway. So when I arrived back on our street, I decided to park a few houses down where the curb was empty. I grabbed my purse and walked briskly down the sidewalk, the crisp morning air doing nothing to calm my racing heart. I approached our estate from the side, intending to slip through the back patio door. I knew the code to the smart lock, and I figured I could sneak in, grab the drive from the nursery, and sneak back out without disturbing Kendrick's business, or risking waking Leo if he had been put down for his morning nap. I keyed in the security code silently. The heavy glass door slid open without a sound. The house was incredibly quiet. There were no voices of contractors echoing from the kitchen, No sounds of construction planning, just a heavy, suffocating silence. I kicked off my heels by the door, walking in my stocking feet down the main hallway. As I approached the grand staircase leading up to the second floor, my motherly instincts kicked in. I did not want to burst into the nursery closet and accidentally startle the baby. I pulled my smartphone from my purse and opened our high-definition baby monitor application. I figured I would check the camera feed first. If Leo was sleeping, I would just tiptoe in like a ghost. The application took a second to buffer before the video feed from the nursery popped onto my screen. Leo was safely in his crib, fast asleep with his favorite stuffed animal. But the room was not empty. The audio feed kicked in, picking up the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor. Kendrick was in the nursery. I raised the volume on my phone, pressing the speaker close to my ear. Kendrick was not soothing our son. He was speaking animatedly on his cell phone, having put the caller on speakerphone while he paced. I immediately recognized the voice coming from the other end of the line. It was Wyatt Kendrick's brother-in-law. Wyatt was a wealthy old money corporate lawyer who was married to Kendrick's sister, Keisha. Wyatt had always treated me with a thinly veiled condescension, constantly offering unsolicited business advice that masked deep-seated microaggressions about my working-class background. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, as I listened to the two men talk. Wyatt's southern drawl echoed through the baby monitor. "Are you sure she is gone, man?" Wyatt asked, his voice entirely too eager. "You are positive she is on her way to the airport?" "She is gone." Kendrick laughed, a cold, cruel sound that I had never heard from him before. I watched her pull out of the driveway myself. She took the bait completely. She even agreed with me when I told her she looked mentally exhausted. "The setup is flawless." "Perfect," Wyatt replied. "The forged notary stamps are locked in the safe at my law firm. Everything is ready on my end. You just need to file the psych evaluation papers on Monday morning while she is still out of town. The private facility director is already paid off. Once we commit her for severe postpartum psychosis, the temporary emergency orders will kick in instantly. I have drawn up the paperwork to ensure I am appointed her legal proxy." I felt the blood drain from my face. The floor beneath my feet seemed to vanish. My hands started shaking so violently I had to grip the wooden banister just to stay upright. Kendrick stopped pacing on the video feed. He stood looking down at our sleeping son, and the absolute malice in his next words nearly knocked the wind out of me. "As soon as she is locked in that psychiatric ward, I get full custody of Leo. She will be declared mentally unfit to parent, and more importantly, she will be declared mentally unfit to manage her assets. I get total control of her business accounts. The company will be ours, Wyatt, all of it." I do not know how I managed to keep breathing. The betrayal was so massive, so incomprehensibly evil, that my brain struggled to process the audio feeding into my ear. The man I loved, the man who had poured my coffee and kissed my forehead just 30 minutes ago, was actively plotting to destroy my entire life. He was not just planning to steal my money, he was planning to steal my sanity. He was conspiring to lock me inside a mental institution using forged medical evaluations and fake legal documents. He was going to rip my 1-year-old son out of my arms and label me a crazy, unfit mother just to get his hands on my wealth. Every moment from this past 6 months suddenly flashed through my mind with sickening clarity. Every time I misplaced my car keys, only to find them in bizarre places where Kendrick had secretly moved them. Every time he convinced me I had forgotten a conversation we never actually had. Every concerned text message he sent to my friends saying I was struggling to cope with motherhood. It had all been a systematic, carefully orchestrated campaign of gaslighting. He had been laying the groundwork, creating a fake paper trail of my mental decline to justify ripping my freedom away. I did not scream. I did not drop to my knees and weep. The devastation that had gripped me only seconds ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating fury that chilled me to my core. Kendrick and his arrogant brother-in-law thought they were playing a brilliant game of chess against a naive, exhausted wife. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had severely underestimated the woman they were trying to destroy. They thought my wealth was sitting in a standard business account. They thought I was just a mid-level IT consultant. They had no idea about the massive acquisition I had secured or the offshore holding companies I had established when I first started noticing Kendrick's shady financial behavior. I locked my phone screen, cutting off the audio feed. I did not confront him. Confrontation is for victims who want an apology. I wanted complete annihilation. I silently turned around and walked back out the patio door, stepping into the crisp morning air. I was going to let my husband execute his plan right up until the moment it destroyed him. I slipped back into the driver's seat of my car, my hands gripping the leather steering wheel with a terrifying calmness. I did not speed away. I drove at exactly the speed limit, merging back onto the Atlanta highway, as if I were just another commuter heading to the airport. The physical distance between me and the estate grew, but my mind was traveling backward, dissecting the last 5 years of my life. How did I end up married to a man capable of such profound evil? The answer was not a mystery. It was rooted entirely in the toxic, enabling soil of the Sterling family. Kendrick grew up in a world obsessed with optics. The Sterlings were a prominent upper-middle-class African-American family who treated Atlanta high society like a highly competitive sport. Their entire lives revolved around exclusive country club memberships, legacy fraternity and sorority, alumni galas, and maintaining an immaculate public facade. Image was their religion, and preserving that image justified any behavior behind closed doors. They lived in a sprawling, pristine mansion in the Cascade neighborhood, throwing lavish garden parties, where the champagne flowed freely, and the conversations were carefully curated to showcase their generational wealth and social standing. Everything about them was polished, rehearsed, and utterly hollow. At the absolute center of this suffocating universe was my mother-in-law, Brenda. Brenda was a woman who wielded her social influence like a weapon, judging everyone who entered her orbit based on a rigid set of elitist criteria. And to Brenda, Kendrick was the golden son. He was the undisputed prince of the Sterling dynasty, who could do absolutely no wrong. Growing up, Kendrick was completely shielded from every consequence of his actions. When he wrecked his first luxury car in high school because he was driving recklessly, Brenda blamed the city for having poorly lit roads. When he dropped out of a prestigious graduate program after failing his core classes, Brenda told her country club friends that the curriculum was simply too stifling for a visionary mind like his. Kendrick learned early on that accountability was a burden meant for other people. He was raised to believe that he deserved the world simply for existing, and if he ever failed, it was always because someone else lacked the vision to support his greatness. He was charming, handsome, and fundamentally empty. I was the exact opposite of everything the Sterlings represented. I did not inherit a trust fund, and my parents did not have their names engraved on any local hospital wings. I grew up on the south side of the city, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse just to keep the electricity turned on. I knew what it meant to stretch a single dollar until it tore. My pedigree was not bought at an Ivy League school or polished at debutante balls. My pedigree was forged in the glow of a second-hand laptop monitor at 3 in the morning. While Kendrick was spending his 20s networking at exclusive galas on his parents' dime, I was grinding through complex algorithms, teaching myself data architecture, and building code that would eventually revolutionize supply chain cybersecurity. I climbed out of poverty using pure, relentless grit. Every milestone I achieved, every contract I secured, and every dollar in my bank account was earned through my own brilliance and sweat. I had no safety net growing up. If I failed, I fell all the way to the concrete. When Kendrick and I started dating, Brenda made her disdain for my working-class background abundantly clear. She viewed me not as an equal partner for her son, but as a utility. She saw me as someone whose new money could fund Kendrick's lavish lifestyle while severely lacking the social pedigree she demanded from her inner circle. Family dinners were an exhausting battlefield of thinly veiled insults. Brenda would look at my natural hair and casually offer me the business card of a stylist who could give me a more polished corporate look. She would ask intrusive, loudly projected questions about my mother's old neighborhood, making sure the other prominent guests at the table heard exactly where I came from. When my business started generating serious revenue, Brenda never once congratulated me on my hard work. Instead, she would sigh and tell her friends that it was a shame I was so aggressively ambitious. She constantly suggested that a proper high society wife should prioritize supporting her husband's endeavors rather than trying to overshadow him with her own career. She constantly threw microaggressions at me, treating my lack of legacy status as a glaring character flaw. She made it abundantly clear that I was merely a guest in their elevated world, a guest they only tolerated because my bank account kept growing. Kendrick was a master of the Sterling family playbook. He knew exactly how to wear the mask of a modern, supportive partner when the cameras were flashing. He attended charity events by my side, flashing his brilliant smile, playing the part of the proud husband to perfection. But behind closed doors, he avoided actual labor like a plague. He viewed hard work as a temporary inconvenience rather than a necessary foundation for success. While I was pulling all-nighters to patch security vulnerabilities in my software, he was meticulously managing his golf handicap and attending weekday brunches with his fraternity brothers. I remembered the time Kendrick decided he wanted to launch a boutique marketing firm. He used his charm to convince me to provide the seed money, promising it was a foolproof investment. Within 8 months, the business folded completely because he spent more time hosting lavish networking dinners than actually acquiring paying clients. When the company went bankrupt, Brenda hosted a family brunch and loudly proclaimed that the local market just was not sophisticated enough to understand Kendrick's elite branding strategy. She even had the audacity to suggest that if I had provided more funding, his genius would have been properly recognized. Kendrick sat at the head of the table, nodding in agreement, soaking up his mother's delusion while drinking expensive wine I had paid for. I bit my tongue back then, choosing peace over conflict, mistakenly believing that a supportive wife should not humiliate her husband in front of his family. I mistook his financial incompetence for bad luck. I mistook Brenda's enabling behavior for maternal love. Brenda validated his entitlement at every turn. She would often pull me aside at family gatherings, her voice dripping with toxic sweetness, to remind me that a man of Kendrick's stature needed space to cultivate his network. She would tell me that I was lucky a man from such a prominent Atlanta family had chosen to marry someone with my humble beginnings. "You provide the foundation, Camille, but Kendrick provides the class," she once whispered to me over glasses of expensive Chardonnay. "It is a partnership. You handle the heavy lifting, and he ensures the Sterling name opens the right doors for you both." She actively framed my exploitation as a privilege. The suffocating social dynamics of their world were designed to make outsiders feel constantly off balance, forever, striving for an approval that would never be granted. They weaponized etiquette, and they weaponized heritage. I was expected to be a silent, well-funded accessory to their grand illusion. But driving away from my house today, the veil was completely lifted. The Sterling family did not just enable Kendrick's entitlement, they weaponized it against me. They believed they were inherently superior, and that my hard-earned resources were rightfully theirs to claim by any means necessary. Brenda did not just dislike my background, she deeply resented my financial independence. To a family that obsessed over control and optics, a self-made woman who did not need their money or their social connections was a massive threat. They tolerated my presence only as long as I was useful. Now that I had given them a grandson to carry on the Sterling name, my usefulness had expired. They viewed my wealth as an asset that belonged to their golden boy, and they were willing to tear my mind apart and lock me in a psychiatric ward to ensure he got it. But Kendrick was not operating alone. He never had the strategic discipline to orchestrate something this complex on his own. He needed a mastermind, someone who knew how to manipulate the legal system with clinical precision. That was where Wyatt came in. Wyatt was married to Kendrick's older sister, Keisha. He was a white, old-money corporate lawyer whose family roots ran deep into the affluent, gated communities of Savannah. Wyatt was the ultimate trophy in Brenda's eyes. To the Sterling family, marrying a wealthy white man with a generational trust fund and an extensive network of country club connections was the absolute pinnacle of social climbing. Brenda worshipped the ground Wyatt walked on. She hung on his every word, treating his legal career as if he were sitting on the United States Supreme Court. Wyatt wore his privilege like a custom-tailored suit. He had perfected the art of the Southern gentleman, but underneath that polite exterior was a deeply ingrained arrogant savior complex. Whenever we were at family gatherings, Wyatt would inevitably corner me with his condescending business advice. He would swirl his expensive bourbon and explain basic corporate tax structures to me, speaking slowly, as if my African-American working-class brain could not possibly comprehend the complexities of the financial world. He loved to remind me that while my tech consulting company was a cute little project, real wealth required legacy management. I always smiled politely and nodded, knowing my code was generating more capital in a single month than his billing hours generated in an entire year. Wyatt needed to feel superior. He needed to be the smartest, most powerful man in the room, and the fact that a black woman from the south side of Atlanta was out earning his generational wealth quietly drove him insane. Keisha, on the other hand, was perfectly content to play the role of the pampered socialite. She spent her days organizing charity galas she barely understood and burning through Wyatt's credit cards to maintain the Sterling family illusion. Together, they were the ultimate success story, and Wyatt was the architect of my impending destruction. As I drove further away from my house, the pieces of the puzzle began snapping together with sickening clarity. The realization hit me so hard it physically took the breath out from my lungs. The gaslighting had not started this morning. It had been happening for months, a slow, methodical poisoning of my reality. I thought back to the weeks immediately following Leo's first birthday. I had been balancing the heavy demands of running a rapidly expanding tech company while navigating the exhausting sleep-deprived reality of new motherhood. I was tired, yes. Every new mother is tired. But Kendrick had taken that normal exhaustion and weaponized it against me with terrifying efficiency. It started with small, maddening details. My car keys would vanish from the entry table where I religiously placed them every single night, only to appear hours later inside the refrigerator or buried at the bottom of the laundry basket. I would frantically search the house, feeling a creeping sense of panic, apologizing repeatedly to Kendrick for my forgetfulness. He would find them, hand them to me with a deeply sympathetic look, and ask if I was feeling okay. He would rub my shoulders and suggest I take a nap, acting like the perfect patient husband dealing with a frantic wife. Then came the appointments. I would miss vital video meetings with my development team because the alerts on my shared calendar had been mysteriously deleted. Important client emails would be marked as read when I had never opened them. When I panicked, Kendrick would wrap his arms around me, kissing the top of my head, telling me that the baby weight and the lack of sleep were clearly frying my brain. He began questioning my memory about conversations we definitely had. I would bring up a weekend plan we had discussed the night before, and he would stare at me with absolute blank confusion. He would swear up and down that we never talked about it, claiming I must have dreamed it or confused it with a television show. He would use this soft, gentle tone that made me feel entirely unhinged. "You are projecting, Camille," he would say softly, holding my shaking hands. "You are exhausted. Your mind is playing tricks on you." He was so incredibly convincing. I actually started keeping a private digital journal hidden on my phone just to ground myself in reality. I thought I was genuinely losing my grip. I even spent hours researching early onset memory loss late at night, terrified that the sheer stress of my career and motherhood was literally breaking my brain. I wept in the shower, convinced I was failing my son and my company. Kendrick would listen to me cry through the bathroom door, probably smiling to himself as his plan took root. But he did not stop at manipulating me behind closed doors. He was actively destroying my reputation in public. I remembered a dinner party we hosted last month with our closest friends and colleagues. I had stepped out to the kitchen to check on the private caterers. When I walked back toward the dining room, I overheard Kendrick speaking in hushed, dramatic tones to my best friend and my lead project manager. He was telling them how worried he was about me. He claimed I was exhibiting erratic behavior, experiencing severe mood swings, and struggling to bond with Leo. He painted a picture of a woman spiraling into a dark, dangerous depression. When I walked into the room, the conversation abruptly stopped. Everyone looked at me with varying degrees of pity and deep concern. I thought my husband was just seeking support from our community because he loved me and was genuinely worried about my health. I felt touched that he cared so much to confide in my friends. I was an absolute fool. Every concerned look, every stolen calendar event, every relocated set of keys was calculated. Kendrick and Wyatt were not just messing with my head. They were meticulously building a legal case. They were planting seeds with my friends, my employees, and my family, so that when the time came to lock me away, nobody would question it. They wanted everyone to say how they saw this coming, how she had been struggling for months, how Kendrick was such a saint for stepping in to take care of the baby and the business. The Concerned Husband Act was nothing but a brilliant sociopathic performance. They were creating a bulletproof narrative for the judge, a severe case of postpartum psychosis, a mother who was a danger to herself and her child, a husband forced to make the heartbreaking decision to commit his wife for her own safety. It was a flawless legal strategy designed by Wyatt to ensure I was stripped of my maternal rights and my financial autonomy in one swift motion. They were going to trap me in a sterile white room, heavily medicated and completely silenced, while they drained my life's work dry. The utter depravity of their scheme made my blood run cold, but the icy shock was rapidly transforming into a calculated, lethal focus. They thought they had broken my mind. They were about to find out that my mind was the most dangerous weapon they could have ever triggered. I kept my foot steady on the gas pedal, bypassing the exit for the airport and merging onto the highway that wrapped around the perimeter of the city. I was not going to Chicago. I was going to war. But to truly understand the sheer breathtaking audacity of the trap my husband and his brother-in-law had set, you have to understand the fundamental arrogance of men like Kendrick and Wyatt. Their entire plot rested on a foundation of profound ignorance and unearned superiority. They were blinded by their own inflated egos, and that blindness was exactly what was going to bury them. Wyatt, the high-powered corporate lawyer with his old money pedigree, and Kendrick, the pampered golden child of the Cascade elite, looked at me and saw a worker bee. They saw a black woman from the working-class South Side who was capable of grinding out a decent living, but who was inherently incapable of true empire-building genius. When I talked about my work at Sunday family dinners, their eyes would inevitably glaze over. They assumed I ran a standard mid-level IT consulting firm. To them, my company was nothing more than a glorified tech support service. They genuinely believed my daily routine consisted of managing firewalls for local dental offices, setting up cloud storage for regional accounting firms, and troubleshooting frozen laptops. I always let them believe it. It was infinitely easier than trying to explain the complexities of algorithmic supply chain encryption to men who only understood golf handicaps and billable hours. Whenever Wyatt asked how the little computer business was doing, I would give him a polite, generic answer. He would swirl his expensive bourbon, pat me condescendingly on the shoulder, and offer to introduce me to some mid-tier clients if I ever needed help expanding my modest operation. He loved playing the role of the benevolent corporate savior, offering crumbs from his table to the striving working-class wife of his brother-in-law. Kendrick was just as dismissive, if not more so. Kendrick's ego was a massive blind spot. He genuinely believed that because he was the man of the house, he was the natural leader of our financial destiny. He thought my success was just a lucky byproduct of his supportive presence. He would tell his friends that he handled the big picture strategy for my business while I just did the typing. He thoroughly enjoyed the lavish lifestyle my income provided. He loved the brick estate, the tailored suits, and the ability to play venture capitalist with my money. But he never once asked to look at the actual code I was writing. He would walk into my home office late at night, set a cup of tea on my desk, glance at the multiple monitors filled with dense, cascading lines of code, and see nothing but absolute gibberish. He did not know the difference between basic network troubleshooting and the proprietary zero-day threat mitigation architecture I was building from scratch. He saw me as a workhorse, a convenient machine generating his endless allowance. He never saw the architect. Wyatt fed into this delusion, validating Kendrick's non-existent business acumen. They echoed in their own chamber of arrogance, convincing each other that taking the company from a mentally fragile woman would be a complete cakewalk. Because they completely lacked the intellectual curiosity to understand my industry, they also lacked the capacity to comprehend my actual net worth. They thought they had my entire financial portfolio mapped out perfectly. Since the day I incorporated my business, I had maintained a primary joint business account with a prominent regional bank. It was a very visible, highly active account that I used to pay our immediate operational expenses, cover payroll for my small initial development team, and manage the hefty overhead of our daily lives. That specific account sat comfortably at around $500,000. To men who lived entirely on credit appearances and the desperate need to maintain a high society facade, $500,000 in liquid cash was a massive, life-changing score. I would soon find out just how desperately they needed that exact amount of money to save themselves from their own reckless choices. But even before my private investigators dug into their rotting finances, I knew they viewed that account as the ultimate prize. In their greedy, narrow minds, seizing control of that $500,000 meant they had conquered my entire empire. They thought that account was the absolute ceiling of my success. They saw the $500,000 as pure, unadulterated profit, just waiting to be spent on sports cars and luxury vacations. They had already spent the money in their minds. They were so incredibly confident in their superiority that they never even bothered to hire a real forensic accountant to look at my corporate structure. Wyatt assumed his law degree made him the smartest person in any room he walked into. He likely pulled the basic incorporation papers, saw my name attached to the joint business account, verified the $500,000 balance, and simply stopped digging. Kendrick, a man who could not even manage a boutique marketing firm without driving it straight into bankruptcy, just saw the zeros on the monthly bank statements and assumed that was the absolute pinnacle of my earning power. They thought they were staging the heist of the century. They believed they were going to swoop in while I was out of town, declare me legally incompetent with their forged psychiatric evaluations, drain the $500,000, and seamlessly take over a cute little tech support company. They assumed the business would just keep generating a steady passive income for them to squander while I rotted away in a sterile, locked room in a psychiatric ward. They thought they had accounted for every single variable. They thought they held all the cards. What they fundamentally failed to realize was that while they were busy playing golf, attending country club galas, and meticulously planning my demise, I was not fixing broken servers. I was writing highly classified military-grade cybersecurity protocols. I was building an advanced logistics defense network designed to protect global supply chains from international ransomware attacks. The code I was compiling late at night while Kendrick slept was so complex, so completely revolutionary, that it was about to change the entire landscape of the tech industry. They were trying to steal a puddle, completely unaware that I secretly owned the ocean. The truth of my empire began exactly 6 months ago, right around the time Kendrick started making comments about my supposed exhaustion. While he was busy laying the groundwork for my psychiatric destruction, I was sitting in a soundproof boardroom in downtown Atlanta, across from 3 senior executives from one of the largest tech conglomerates in Silicon Valley. They were not there to offer me a job or a mid-tier partnership. They had spent weeks running rigorous stress tests on the logistics defense network I had built, and they realized my code was entirely unbreakable. They wanted to acquire the intellectual property outright. They slid a pristine white folder across the mahogany table, and when I opened it, the number printed on the term sheet was $25 million. For a brief, fleeting second, my first instinct was to run home, pop a bottle of expensive champagne, and celebrate this monumental victory with the man I had married. I wanted to share the reality of our new generational wealth, But that instinct died almost instantly, suffocated by the cold, hard facts I had been quietly observing in my own home. A woman who writes security software for a living is trained to look for vulnerabilities, anomalies, and breaches in a system. And the system of my marriage had been flashing bright red warning lights for months. It started with the subtle, unexplained credit inquiries. I have tight security on my personal information, and I began receiving alerts about hard pulls on my credit file. When I confronted Kendrick about it, he brushed it off with his signature charming smile, claiming it was just a glitch from a joint insurance application or a routine background check for his country club membership. But then, the missing funds started appearing. I maintained several minor household accounts for our daily expenses, separate from my business capital. I noticed transfers of $5,000 here, $10,000 there, quietly funneled into accounts I did not recognize. When pressed, Kendrick would get deeply defensive, gaslighting me by saying he had already told me about an angel investment he was making with his fraternity brothers, or that he was covering emergency medical bills for an extended family member. He played on my empathy and my busy schedule, hoping I would not look too closely at the ledger. But I looked at everything. I saw the desperate, frantic energy beneath his polished exterior. I knew Kendrick was bleeding cash, hiding a massive financial hemorrhage that he was trying to patch before the walls closed in on him. I did not know exactly who he owed money to yet, but I knew he was deeply compromised. So when the $25 million acquisition became a reality, I made a choice that ultimately saved my life. I did not breathe a single word of it to my husband. I went home, cooked dinner, asked him how his golf game went, and kissed his cheek. The next morning, I flew to New York and retained the services of an elite, ruthless wealth management firm that specialized in asset protection for high net worth individuals. I explicitly instructed them to build a financial fortress around the acquisition payout, completely severing the funds from my personal domestic records. The Silicon Valley Titan did not wire the money to my joint business account. Instead, the $25 million was routed through a complex, legally bulletproof labyrinth. The funds were deposited directly into an irrevocable blind trust, which was then layered beneath a web of offshore holding companies and anonymous limited liability corporations. There was no paper trail linking my married name to the liquid assets. The money was securely parked in jurisdictions that Wyatt and his arrogant Atlanta law firm could never subpoena, let alone access. To even view the balance of those offshore accounts required encrypted biometric verification and multi-factor authorization protocols that only I possessed. The $500,000 sitting in my regional business account, the money Kendrick and Wyatt were currently salivating over, was nothing but operational bait. I had purposefully left it fully funded to keep up the appearance of a thriving but modest consulting business. It was the perfect decoy. It kept Kendrick comfortable, allowing him to swipe his credit cards and maintain his wealthy facade without ever questioning where the real money was flowing. He was so completely blinded by his own greed and his inherent underestimation of my intelligence that he never bothered to verify if the prize he was hunting was actually the whole treasure. As I merged onto the interstate heading toward the secure hotel that would become my temporary command center, a cold, sharp laugh escaped my chest. The staggering irony of their plot was almost beautiful in its poetic justice. Kendrick and Wyatt were actively conspiring to commit federal wire fraud. They were forging legal and medical documents across state lines. They were plotting the false imprisonment of a sane woman and the kidnapping of a 1-year-old child. They were putting their reputations, their freedom, and their entire lives on the line. If caught, Wyatt would be permanently disbarred and face a decade in federal prison. Kendrick would lose everything and end up in a cell right beside him. They were willing to burn the world down, absolutely convinced they were pulling off the perfect heist to secure my fortune. But they were risking decades in a federal penitentiary to steal a decoy account that held a fraction of my actual net worth. They were laying down their lives for pennies. They were about to step right into a bear trap, utterly convinced they were the hunters, completely unaware that the real predator was already watching them from the shadows. Before I had backed my car out of the neighborhood, before I had merged onto the interstate with a cold smile on my face, I had to ensure the trap was fully armed. I stood completely still in the grand hallway of my home, the polished oak floor cool beneath my stocking feet. The morning sun was still casting warm golden rays through the transom windows, illuminating a house that was built on a foundation of absolute lies. I stared down at the glowing screen of my smartphone. The baby monitor application featured a direct high-definition screen, recording function designed for parents to capture cute moments of their children babbling in their cribs. My thumb hovered over the screen. I tapped the small red circle. The recording timer started ticking. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. I held the phone close to my ear, capturing every single syllable of the conspiracy echoing out of the nursery. Wyatt's arrogant, aristocratic drawl was unmistakable. "The paperwork is entirely bulletproof," Kendrick Wyatt said, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. "I had one of the junior associates at my firm notarize the power of attorney late last night. The kid was so desperate to impress me that he stamped the document without even glancing at the signature line. The forged psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Evans is already signed, sealed, and sitting inside the primary safe at my law firm right now. I have the only combination code." I heard the sound of Kendrick's expensive leather loafers pacing across the nursery floor. "And Evans is fully taken care of?" he asked. "He is not going to get cold feet when the police show up." "I wired his consulting fee through a blind vendor account this morning," Wyatt confirmed smoothly. "He knows exactly what is at stake. When the transport team arrives at your house on Monday, the paramedics will be holding a legally binding court-approved medical order signed by a licensed board-certified psychiatrist. The document states explicitly that your wife is suffering from severe violent postpartum psychosis and is an immediate danger to herself and the child. The paramedics are not going to ask questions. They are not going to listen to her plead. They are just going to strap her to the gurney, sedate her if necessary, and take her away." The clinical, emotionless precision of their planning was breathtaking. They were casually orchestrating the permanent destruction of my freedom, as if they were negotiating the terms of a real estate transaction. I watched the recording timer hit 45 seconds. I was capturing a masterclass in federal wire fraud and criminal conspiracy directly from the mouths of the perpetrators. Then the conversation shifted, and the final nail was driven into the coffin of my marriage. "What about the kid?" Wyatt asked, a hint of logistical concern entering his voice. "Leo is going to be screaming his head off when a team of strangers forcefully drags his mother out of the house. Child Protective Services might initiate an automatic wellness check if the neighbors hear that kind of domestic commotion. We cannot afford any state social workers poking their noses into this." I held my breath, waiting to hear how the father of my child would respond. I waited for a flicker of hesitation, a moment of paternal instinct, a shred of guilt about inflicting profound psychological trauma on his 1-year-old son. Instead, Kendrick just sighed. It was not a sigh of heavy conscience. It was a sigh of profound annoyance. "Let him scream," Kendrick replied, his voice flat and entirely devoid of warmth. "He is barely a year old, Wyatt. He is not going to remember any of this. I will just hand him off to my mother for a few weeks until the dust settles and Camille is locked down permanently in the facility. Brenda will keep him quiet and out of sight. He will be fine. I am absolutely not letting a crying baby get in the way of securing our future." That was the exact moment it happened. That was the precise second the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, died completely in my mind. It was not a dramatic, explosive realization. It was a quiet, structural collapse. The love I held for Kendrick did not bleed out slowly. It simply ceased to exist, evaporating into the cold morning air. He was not just plotting to toss me into a mental asylum. He was actively discarding our son's trauma as a minor, irritating logistical hurdle. He was willing to let his child watch his mother be dragged away in a straitjacket, screaming and terrified, just so he could get his hands on my bank accounts. Any lingering shred of affection, any tiny irrational voice in the back of my head, wondering if there was a misunderstanding, was instantly vaporized. The warmth in my chest was replaced by an absolute glacial zero. I was no longer a wife trying to understand her husband. I was an apex predator, protecting my cub from a threat. I watched the recording counter cross the 2-minute mark. I had captured everything I needed. I had their clear intent. I had their exact timeline. I had the physical location of the forged documents locked inside Wyatt's safe. I had the name of the corrupt psychiatrist they had bribed. I had an airtight, high-definition audio confession of an ongoing criminal conspiracy. I tapped the red circle again, stopping the recording. I immediately uploaded the encrypted audio file directly to my secure offshore cloud server, ensuring it was backed up in 3 separate international data centers. Then I wiped the local cache from my device. If they somehow managed to get my phone, they would find absolutely nothing. I took one last look around the beautiful sunlit hallway of the estate I had paid for. I did not shed a single tear. I silently turned around, walked out the back patio door, and slipped into the driver's seat of my car. As I pulled away from the curb and headed toward the highway, I was no longer the exhausted mother they thought they were hunting. I was the architect of their ruin, and the demolition was about to begin. I merged onto Interstate 85, blending my sleek sedan into the thick, heavy flow of Atlanta morning traffic. To anyone looking at my license plate or tracking my vehicle, I was just another corporate executive heading toward Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport for a routine business trip. But I was not going to the airport, and I was definitely not getting on a plane to Chicago. I needed to become a complete ghost, erasing my physical footprint while leaving my digital shadow perfectly intact to feed Kendrick the illusion he so desperately craved. As I drove, I reached into my purse and pulled out my primary smartphone. This was the device Kendrick actively monitored through a shared family location application. He always loved pretending that tracking my phone was just his way of ensuring his beautiful wife was safe during her travels. In reality, it was a leash. I pulled into a crowded coffee shop parking lot about 3 miles away from the domestic terminal. I accessed the developer settings on my phone, bypassing the basic user interface, and launched a custom script I had written months ago for penetration testing. Within seconds, I spoofed my global positioning coordinates. To Kendrick and anyone checking the family application, my little blue dot was currently walking right through the transportation security checkpoint at the airport. I programmed the script to hold that exact location for another hour, before simulating a complete network disconnect, perfectly matching the timeline of a phone switching to airplane mode before a flight takeoff. Once the script was running flawlessly, I powered down my vehicle integrated navigation system and pulled back onto the road, heading in the exact opposite direction of the airport. I navigated toward Buckhead, the affluent commercial and residential district known for its towering glass skyscrapers and aggressive privacy. I bypassed the standard luxury chains and pulled into the underground parking garage of an ultra-exclusive boutique hotel. It was a place designed specifically for high-profile diplomats, elite entertainers, and tech billionaires who required absolute anonymity. There was no grand lobby or bustling concierge desk. Instead, I took a private elevator directly from the garage to a secured, restricted floor. I walked up to the sleek, minimalist reception desk and presented a black, heavy metal credit card tied directly to one of my offshore limited liability companies. The concierge, a sharply dressed man who knew better than to ask any probing questions, processed the transaction seamlessly. I did not use my real name. I checked in under my corporate entity, invoking an ironclad, non-disclosure agreement that the hotel kept on file for its elite clientele. The non-disclosure agreement legally bound the hotel staff to absolute silence if law enforcement or private investigators came knocking. Without a federal warrant, the hotel would deny I even existed. The concierge handed me a blank keycard and directed me to a private suite on the top floor. No bellhop offered to take my bags. Anonymity meant carrying your own weight, and I was fully prepared to carry mine. I stepped into the penthouse suite and locked the heavy oak door behind me, engaging the deadbolt and the solid steel security chain. The suite was breathtaking, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the sprawling Atlanta skyline. But I was not there for the view. I walked straight to the windows and pulled the heavy blackout curtains tightly shut, plunging the room into cool artificial darkness. I turned on a single desk lamp and hoisted my suitcase onto the massive glass dining table in the center of the room. Kendrick thought I had packed designer pantsuits and elegant blouses for a series of keynote speeches in Chicago. He was wrong. I unzipped the suitcase to reveal its actual contents. Beneath a thin layer of decoy clothing lay my true arsenal. I pulled out 3 high-performance military-grade laptops, 2 encrypted external servers, and a tangle of specialized networking cables. I arranged the hardware across the glass table, booting up the machines in a synchronized sequence. Within 20 minutes, the dining table had been transformed into a fully operational, highly secure digital war room. The screens glowed in the dim light, displaying cascading lines of encrypted data, secure communication channels, and real-time financial monitoring dashboards. I bypassed the hotel public wireless network entirely. Instead, I connected my array to a series of decentralized private satellite uplinks I maintained specifically for my cybersecurity firm. I was now operating completely off the grid. No local server could log my internet protocol address. No internet service provider could track my search history. My digital footprint was heavily encrypted, bounced through a dozen international proxy servers before ever hitting the open web. I sat down in the ergonomic leather chair at the head of the table and cracked my knuckles. The silence of the hotel room was deafening, but my mind was operating at a deafening roar. I had successfully vanished from the face of the earth. Kendrick and Wyatt were back at the estate, celebrating their brilliant victory, utterly convinced that the exhausted, fragile mother of their victim was currently thousands of feet in the air, completely isolated and defenseless. They had no idea that I was sitting less than 20 miles away, fully armed, wide awake, and preparing to burn their entire reality to the ground. I opened a secure encrypted messaging protocol on my primary monitor and prepared to summon the hounds. It was time to mobilize the only people in the world I trusted to help me execute this demolition. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, initiating a direct, highly encrypted connection to a boutique legal firm based between Geneva and New York. This was not the polite, mahogany-paneled family law firm that handled my standard business contracts and daily corporate filings. This team operated completely in the shadows. They answered exclusively to the blind trust I had established months ago to protect my massive acquisition payout. They were a ruthless, highly specialized syndicate composed of former federal prosecutors, aggressive asset protection attorneys, and elite private investigators. I typed a single secure authorization code into the terminal, followed by a brief, highly specific directive. I needed a complete unauthorized and microscopic forensic deep dive into the financial lives of my husband Kendrick and his brother-in-law Wyatt. I gave them exactly 48 hours to strip these 2 men down to their absolute financial skeletons. The response pinged back almost immediately on my screen, confirming the receipt of the target profiles. The hounds were officially off the leash. For the next 2 days, I barely moved from the glow of my monitors. I ordered room service, ate mechanically, and drank black coffee while quietly managing my tech company through secure proxy servers to maintain the illusion of my business trip. The digital war room hummed with quiet, relentless efficiency. I watched real-time data packets trickle into my secure inbox as the forensic accountants bypassed standard firewalls, subpoenaed hidden bank records through aggressive back channels, and pulled highly restricted credit reports that the average person did not even know existed. My investigators did not just look at the polished, wealthy facade that Kendrick and Wyatt presented to the elite Atlanta social circles. They looked specifically at the dark corners these men were desperately trying to hide. They dug into the dark web transactions, the offshore shell accounts, the hidden liabilities, and the digital footprints that would normally escape a standard domestic audit. The first major bombshell dropped into my secure inbox exactly 36 hours into the investigation. I opened the encrypted dossier on Wyatt, fully expecting to find a few over-leveraged platinum credit cards or perhaps a secret mistress. The reality was so much worse and infinitely more pathetic. Wyatt, the old money Southern gentleman who loved to look down his nose at my working-class background, was completely and utterly broke. His generational trust fund had dried up years ago, drained by a series of arrogant, poorly researched investments, and his desperate clawing need to maintain his elite status at the local country club. To fund his wife Keisha and her relentless lavish lifestyle of high-profile charity, galas, expensive designer wardrobes, and luxury European vacations, Wyatt had resorted to stealing. The forensic accountants uncovered a massive systematic embezzlement scheme hidden deep within his own prestigious law firm. Wyatt had been quietly siphoning money out of his high-net-worth clients' escrow accounts for the last 3 years, shuffling the stolen funds through a complex web of fake vendor invoices and dummy corporations to cover his tracks. But his tracks were getting incredibly sloppy. The dossier indicated that the senior managing partners at his firm had recently initiated a comprehensive internal audit. Wyatt was weeks, maybe days away from being discovered. The moment the auditors matched the missing funds to his signature, he would be permanently disbarred, publicly humiliated, and indicted on multiple federal wire fraud charges. He needed to replace the stolen escrow funds immediately to balance the firm's ledgers before the auditors caught on. Just as I was processing the sheer magnitude of Wyatt's criminal exposure, the second encrypted file arrived on my desktop. This one detailed Kendrick's true financial reality. The golden son of the Sterling family, the man who let his mother treat him like royalty, was currently drowning in an ocean of toxic, unmanageable debt. Kendrick had spent the last 2 years secretly gambling on high-risk, unregulated cryptocurrency markets, utterly convinced that his unmatched visionary intellect would make him a billionaire overnight without ever doing a hard day of actual work. When those volatile markets inevitably crashed, he did not just lose his initial investments. His arrogance pushed him to try and cover his massive losses by borrowing heavily against margins he did not actually possess. When traditional banks eventually cut off his credit lines, he turned to the shadows. The investigators uncovered a terrifying digital paper trail, proving that Kendrick was currently buried under $300,000 of debt, owed to incredibly dangerous, unregulated private lenders. These were not the kind of creditors who sent polite collection letters or simply damaged your credit score. These were men operating in the criminal underworld, individuals who broke legs, issued physical threats, and ruined families when they did not get their money on time. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Kendrick had brought the shadow of violent, dangerous criminals right to the doorstep of the home where our 1-year-old son slept. The loan sharks were circling their deadlines, had completely expired, and my husband was completely out of options. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, the harsh blue light of the monitors reflecting off my face in the darkened hotel room. Everything suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. Kendrick and Wyatt were not just a pair of arrogant, greedy men looking for a quick, easy payday to boost their inflated egos. They were absolutely desperate. They were cornered animals staring directly down the barrel of federal prison sentences and violent criminal retribution. My decoy business account, holding $500,000, was not just a prize to them. It was their exact salvation. It was the precise amount of money they needed to balance the stolen escrow accounts for Wyatt and pay off the violent loan sharks breathing down Kendrick's neck. They were meticulously plotting to destroy my sanity, steal my son, and rip away my freedom because their own lives were already completely destroyed. Their profound desperation made them incredibly dangerous, but it also made them predictable. They were operating on a ticking clock driven by blind panic, which meant they were going to rush their execution. I closed the dossiers on my screen and exhaled a long, steady breath. I knew exactly what motivated them now, and I knew exactly how to use that desperation to guide them right into the center of my trap. I knew that to completely destroy Kendrick, I had to give him the exact version of reality he desperately wanted to see. I had to feed his arrogance and validate his gaslighting until he felt so invincible that he abandoned all caution. Setting up the illusion required absolute precision. I could not just point my smartphone camera at a blank hotel wall and hope he would not notice the difference in architecture or lighting. I needed to transport myself to Chicago digitally. Using my secure corporate funds, I had a high-definition portable green screen delivered directly to the loading dock of my Atlanta hotel. I set it up behind my desk chair in the darkened suite, calibrating the chroma key settings on my broadcasting software to project a flawless moving background of a luxury suite overlooking the snowy Chicago skyline. I adjusted the artificial lighting in my room to mimic the gray overcast Midwestern afternoon, ensuring the color temperature matched perfectly. Next, I had to physically transform myself into the broken, unraveling woman they had constructed in their minds. I walked into the marble bathroom and stared at my reflection. I wiped away my usual flawless foundation, deliberately leaving the dark circles under my eyes exposed. I smudged my eyeliner just a fraction to make it look like I had been rubbing my eyes in frustration. I changed into a crisp silk blouse, then intentionally wrinkled the collar and rolled up the sleeves unevenly. I let the genuine exhaustion of the past 48 hours, the lack of sleep and the sheer adrenaline of my discovery, settle onto my features. If my husband wanted a mentally fragile wife teetering on the edge of a breakdown, I was going to deliver a performance that would win an Academy Award. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, launched the encrypted video routing protocol to mask my internet protocol address, and initiated the FaceTime call to Kendrick. He answered on the second ring. The screen illuminated, showing Kendrick sitting comfortably on the expensive leather sofa in our sunlit Atlanta living room. He was bouncing our 1-year-old son Leo on his knee. Seeing my baby boy through the digital screen sent a sharp, agonizing spike of pain directly through my chest. Every maternal instinct I possessed screamed at me to jump in my car, drive back to the estate, snatch my son from his arms, and run. But I brutally forced that emotion down, burying it under a thick, impenetrable layer of ice. I could not afford to be a mother right now. I had to be a predator. "Hey, baby," Kendrick said, his voice dripping with that sickening manufactured warmth he had perfected over the years. "Look who is missing his mama. Say hi to Mama Leo." I let out a heavy, ragged sigh and rubbed my temples with 2 fingers, leaning close to the camera lens so he could clearly see the fabricated stress etched onto my face. "Hi, my sweet boy," I whispered, making my voice sound brittle and thin. "I miss you so much." I looked back up at Kendrick, letting my shoulders slump. "It is absolutely freezing here," I told him, staring into the camera. "And the conference is just completely overwhelming today. I cannot seem to focus on anything. My head is pounding." I watched Kendrick's eyes light up with predatory satisfaction, though he instantly masked it beneath a veneer of deep, loving concern. He shifted Leo on his knee and leaned forward, bringing his face closer to the screen. "You have been pushing yourself way too hard, Camille," he said softly, using the exact patronizing tone that used to make me feel safe. "I told you this trip was going to drain you completely. Have you been drinking enough water? Did you at least make it to your keynote panel on time this morning?" It was the perfect opening. I deliberately paused, widening my eyes in feigned, breathless panic. I touched my forehead, stammering slightly as I looked away from the lens. "Oh my God, Kendrick," I breathed out, letting a tremor shake my voice. "I think I completely mixed up the schedule. I missed the morning panel entirely. I could not remember what conference room it was supposed to be in, and when I looked at my digital calendar, the words just looked like a blur." I ended up wandering the convention center for an hour. I feel like I am losing my mind. He swallowed the bait whole. I could practically see the gears turning behind his eyes, calculating exactly how he would document this fabricated memory lapse to bolster the forged psychiatric evaluation sitting in Wyatt's safe. He put on his best comforting face, the mask of a saint dealing with a deeply disturbed spouse. Hey, it is okay," he cooed, his voice slick with calculated manipulation. "Do not panic, baby. You are just exhausted. The baby has not been sleeping well this month, and you have been carrying so much heavy weight with the business. Your brain is just tired. Anyone would be forgetting things under this much pressure." Over the next 3 days, I perfected the art of the crumbling wife. Every single evening, we would connect over video chat, and every evening I would hand him a brand new symptom of my supposed cognitive decline. I pretended to lose my hotel room keycard, calling him in a state of manufactured hysteria from the hallway. I cried on camera, claiming I felt completely detached from reality and that the walls of my hotel room were closing in on me. I asked him the same basic questions twice in a single conversation, carefully watching his reactions. During one of these calls, I saw him briefly glance off camera and exchange a knowing, triumphant nod with someone outside the frame. I knew with absolute certainty that Wyatt was sitting right there in my living room, drinking my expensive liquor, listening to me unravel, completely convinced their psychological warfare was working flawlessly. On the final night of my fake business trip, I gave him exactly what he needed to fully justify his impending ambush. I sat in the dim light of my hotel room, wearing an oversized, baggy sweater, rocking back and forth slightly in my chair. I stared blankly into the camera, looking utterly defeated, and let a single genuine tear roll down my cheek. "Kendrick," I whispered, my voice breaking perfectly. "I do not feel right. I feel like I am not really in my own body anymore. I am so scared of what is happening to my brain." Kendrick looked back at me through the screen, his handsome face arranged into a masterpiece of profound, tragic sympathy. He lowered his voice to that gentle, suffocating register he reserved for wounded animals. "You look so tired, baby," he said, dragging out the syllables to sound as nurturing and protective as possible. "You are completely burned out. I really think we need to talk to a doctor when you get home, someone who can give you the help you actually need." I stared back at the man who was actively plotting to lock me in a psychiatric ward, drug me into submission, and steal my child to pay off violent loan sharks. My blood ran like liquid nitrogen through my veins. I let a slow, dead-eyed smile creep across my face, a smile completely devoid of any actual human warmth. "You are right," I replied, my voice hollow and beautifully compliant. "I will do whatever you think is best, Kendrick. We will take care of everything as soon as I get back." He smiled his brilliant, victorious smile, utterly convinced he had won the game, completely unaware that he had just signed his own death warrant. I ended the video call and immediately let the mask drop. My fake, submissive smile vanished, replaced by a tight, rigid line of absolute determination. I wiped the single, carefully manufactured tear from my cheek, using the back of my hand. The performance was over. It was time to transition from the theater of the victim, right back to the cold, calculating reality of the war room. I spun my ergonomic chair around to face the glowing array of monitors spread across the glass dining table. Kendrick and his arrogant brother-in-law were moving forward with their timeline, completely assured of their impending victory. They were counting on my institutionalization to trigger a smooth, seamless transfer of my assets. They needed that money urgently. Wyatt was facing a catastrophic law firm audit, and Kendrick was staring down violent loan sharks. Their desperation meant they were going to move fast the moment they thought I was locked away. I had to make sure that the exact moment they reached for the prize, the vault would slam shut and crush their hands. I opened a secure, encrypted communication channel with my elite legal and financial team. I typed out my next set of directives with rapid, punishing keystrokes. We were not going to drain the decoy business account. If Kendrick logged into the banking portal and saw a zero balance, his panic would cause him to abandon the psychiatric hold and scatter. The $500,000 had to remain perfectly visible, a shimmering oasis of cash just sitting there begging to be taken. But the water in that oasis was going to be laced with a digital neurotoxin. My cybersecurity developers worked in tandem with my asset protection lawyers to interface directly with the high-level fraud department of the regional bank. Under the strict legal cover of an ongoing highly classified security audit, we placed a customized algorithmic lock on the joint business account. It was a digital tripwire crafted with absolute malice. Kendrick would be able to log in. He would be able to view the balance. He would even be able to initiate the transfer protocol. But the system was rigged with a hard-coded contingency. The very millisecond he attempted to wire or transfer any amount exceeding $5,000 to an external account, the trap would spring. The algorithmic lock would not just decline the transaction, it would initiate a catastrophic system-wide freeze on his entire financial identity. The banking portal would lock him out permanently. An automated priority fraud alert would instantly generate capturing his internet protocol, address his geographic location, and the destination routing numbers of his intended transfer. This unalterable digital footprint would then be automatically forwarded directly to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and the federal authorities currently investigating Wyatt. Kendrick thought he was going to execute a quiet, seamless theft. Instead, I had engineered a system where the simple click of a computer mouse would force my husband to hand the federal government a time-stamped, irrefutable confession of attempted grand larceny. With the financial snare perfectly armed and invisible to the naked eye, I turned my attention to the most critical, sacred piece of this entire operation. The money was just a tool. My son was my heartbeat. The audio recording of Kendrick dismissing Leo, screaming while his mother was dragged away, had permanently severed whatever humanity I thought my husband possessed. Kendrick viewed my beautiful baby boy as a mere logistical hurdle, a prop he could hand over to his toxic mother Brenda until the dust settled. I was going to ensure that Kendrick Sterling would never be allowed within 100 miles of my child for the rest of his miserable life. I instructed my offshore legal syndicate to connect me with the most ruthless, terrifyingly effective family law attorney operating in the state of Georgia. I did not want a mediator. I wanted a legal assassin. Within an hour, I was on a secure video conference with a woman who charged more per hour than Kendrick made in a month. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I securely transferred the pristine, unedited audio recording I had captured from the nursery baby monitor directly to her encrypted server. I watched her face as she listened to Wyatt and Kendrick explicitly detail their plot to forge a psychiatric evaluation bribe, a medical professional, and falsely imprison a competent mother. I watched her expression harden into pure, weaponized legal fury when Kendrick casually discussed ignoring his infant son experiencing severe trauma. We bypassed the standard sluggish cues of the family court system entirely. My attorney drafted an emergency ex parte custody petition. An ex parte filing meant we were bringing this directly to a judge without Kendrick being notified or given a chance to respond. You only get one shot at an ex parte order, and the burden of proof is incredibly high. You have to prove extreme, immediate, and life-threatening danger to the child and the mother. Our legal brief was a masterpiece of total destruction. We did not just claim emotional abuse or marital strife. We submitted the audio recording as direct evidence of an active, ongoing criminal conspiracy involving kidnapping, medical fraud, and false imprisonment. But we went even further. My private investigators included the verified documentation of Kendrick's massive delinquent debts to unregulated, violent criminal syndicates. By bringing loan sharks into his financial ecosystem, Kendrick had actively placed a toddler in the crosshairs of dangerous men. We painted a picture not of a struggling father, but of a desperate, cornered criminal who was willing to destroy his own family to save himself from the underworld. The petition was submitted directly to a highly vetted, no-nonsense Superior Court judge late on a Friday afternoon. The evidence was so overwhelming, so undeniably horrifying, that the judge did not even ask for a secondary hearing. The seal was signed before the courthouse closed for the weekend. The order was absolute. I was granted immediate sole physical and legal custody of Leo. Kendrick was stripped of all parental rights pending a massive federal and state investigation. The judge also granted a blanket, heavily enforced restraining order prohibiting Kendrick, Wyatt, Keisha, and Brenda from coming anywhere near my son or myself. The signed court-certified documents were securely delivered to my legal team and held in absolute airtight secrecy. Kendrick had no idea he was already legally dead. He had no idea his rights to his child had been permanently revoked by a judge. He was still walking around our Atlanta estate playing the role of the soon-to-be wealthy bachelor, picking out which sports car he was going to buy with my money. The legal guillotine was already suspended directly over his neck. The blade was razor-sharp. All I had to do now was walk back into my house, smile at my husband, and wait for him to pull the lever. With my son legally protected and my husband wandering blindly toward his own financial execution, I turned my attention to the architect of this entire operation, Wyatt. The old money aristocrat who thought his generational wealth and country club pedigree made him completely untouchable. He had looked down on me for years, assuming my working-class background meant I lacked the sophistication to play in his elevated league. He treated the law like a country club, where he held a permanent VIP membership, bending rules and exploiting loopholes with a casual, terrifying arrogance. He was about to learn that true power does not announce itself at charity galas or over glasses of expensive bourbon. True power moves in complete silence until it breaks your neck. Wyatt was a senior partner at one of the most prestigious white shoe law firms in Atlanta. It was an institution built on legacy, absolute discretion, and the unshakable trust of its high net worth clients. My private investigators had already mapped out the exact routes Wyatt used to siphon money from those clients. I did not want him quietly fired or asked to resign behind closed doors, allowing him to save face and find employment elsewhere. I wanted a spectacular, unavoidable implosion. I instructed my offshore legal syndicate to compile a massive, undeniable dossier of his ongoing embezzlement. We did not send an anonymous tip or a vague email. My attorneys hired a private courier service to hand-deliver thick-bound copies of the forensic accounting reports directly to the private residences of the 3 senior managing partners of Wyatt's firm early on a Saturday morning. The dossiers contained exact bank routing numbers, time-stamped ledger discrepancies, and irrefutable proof that Wyatt was stealing millions from escrow accounts to fund his wife Keisha and her relentless shopping habits. I knew exactly how elite law firms operated when threatened with a public scandal. By noon, sheer panic would be spreading through the highest echelons of his firm. The managing partners would be forced to initiate a catastrophic internal lockdown to save their own licenses and protect the firm from massive liability. Wyatt would walk into his office on Monday morning entirely unaware that his keycard was about to be deactivated, his computer seized, and his own partners were preparing to throw him directly to the wolves. But ruining his career and cutting off his income was simply not enough. I wanted to ensure Wyatt spent the next decade wearing a federal prison jumpsuit. He was not just stealing money. He was conspiring to kidnap a child and commit a perfectly sane woman to a psychiatric ward. My legal team took the unedited high-definition audio recording from the nursery, paired it with the dossier of his embezzlement, and systematically mapped out his numerous violations of federal law. Wyatt had utilized interstate telecommunications to coordinate a criminal conspiracy. He had actively bribed a licensed medical professional, Dr. Evans, to falsify a severe psychiatric evaluation. He had coerced a junior associate at his own firm to illegally stamp a forged power of attorney document without verifying the signature. We packaged this mountain of devastating evidence and handed it directly to a specialized contact my lawyers maintained at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We did not stop there. A duplicate package, heavily documented and legally certified, was submitted straight to the Ethics Committee of the Georgia State Bar Association. We explicitly highlighted the fraudulent notary stamps and the weaponization of the legal system to execute a false medical imprisonment. The State Bar takes a remarkably dim view of attorneys who use their professional credentials to coordinate kidnappings and medical fraud. The federal agents were uniquely interested in the wire fraud and the corrupt medical practitioner who was facilitating the conspiracy. Dr. Evans was about to find his private clinic raided by federal authorities, and he would undoubtedly flip on Wyatt the very second they played the audio transcript of the bribe. Wyatt believed he was conducting a flawless high society heist. He thought he was the puppet master pulling the strings on a fragile, exhausted mother who was too blinded by sleep deprivation to see the trap. Instead, I had methodically woven a titanium net around his entire existence. Every single exit route was permanently blocked. His law firm was actively turning against him. The federal government was quietly building an airtight indictment. The state bar was preparing to strip away his license and humiliate him publicly. He had absolutely no idea that the very documents he locked inside his office, save the forged medical evaluation and the fake legal proxy, were no longer his weapons. They were the exact pieces of physical evidence the federal agents would use to bury him alive. The digital war room in my anonymous hotel suite fell quiet. The heavy lifting was officially done. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and watched the confirmation emails roll in from my legal syndicate one by one. The algorithmic locks on my decoy business account were armed and waiting. The emergency custody orders granting me sole protection of Leo were sealed, signed, and secured by the judge. The federal authorities had their targets locked and their investigations authorized. The snare was perfectly flawlessly set. I closed my military-grade laptops one by one, watching the bright screens fade to black. I packed my servers, my networking cables, and my green screen back into my suitcase with deliberate, measured movements. The cold, calculating fury that had sustained me for the past 3 days settled into a deep, unshakable calm. I was no longer operating in the shadows. The invisible groundwork was complete, and the board was set exactly to my specifications. It was time to step back into the light. It was time to return to the sprawling brick estate in Cascade, to smile at the man who plotted my absolute destruction, and to play the role of the perfect, oblivious wife one last time. I was going to walk right into their arms, hand them the rope, and patiently watch as they tied it around their own necks. I pulled my car into the long, circular driveway of our Cascade estate late Sunday afternoon, letting the engine idle for a moment as I stared at the towering brick facade of the home I had paid for. The manicured lawns and perfectly pruned hedges looked exactly as I had left them, projecting an image of absolute, undisturbed peace. I took a deep, steadying breath, dropping my shoulders and physically relaxing my posture to summon the ghost of the exhausted, unraveling woman I was required to be. I unlocked the front door and dragged my suitcase over the threshold, making my steps deliberately heavy and slow. Kendrick was waiting for me in the grand foyer, playing his part with sickening perfection. The moment he heard the door open, he rushed forward, his face arranged into a mask of profound, tragic relief. He pulled me into a tight, suffocating embrace, burying his face in my hair. He smelled like expensive cologne and absolute deceit. "You made it home," he whispered, pulling back just enough to look deeply into my eyes. He reached up, tracing the dark, carefully applied makeup smudges beneath my lower lashes with his thumb. "You look so drained, baby. I was worried sick about you all weekend. You just need to rest your fragile mind now. I have got everything taken care of here. You do not need to lift a single finger." The words "fragile mind" hit my ears like a physical strike, a condescending, deeply calculated insult wrapped in the velvet of marital concern. I wanted to reach out and crush his windpipe, but I simply let out a long, ragged sigh and leaned into his chest, playing the compliant, broken wife to absolute perfection. I asked him where Leo was letting a tremor of maternal anxiety bleed into my voice. Kendrick smiled, his brilliant, reassuring smile, guiding me toward the plush living room sofa. He told me our son was fast asleep in the nursery, blissfully unaware of his mother being so overwhelmed. He brought me a glass of ice water, sat beside me, and began gently rubbing my shoulders. "I know you are feeling completely depleted, Camille," he said softly, keeping his voice in that low, hypnotic register he used when he was trying to steer my reality. "But my mother is hosting her massive 60th birthday gala this coming Saturday at the country club. The entire family is flying in, and half the city council will be there. I really think we need to attend together." I looked down at my hands, pretending to hesitate. "I do not know, Kendrick," I murmured, letting my voice sound thin and brittle. "I feel so overwhelmed just thinking about a crowd that large right now. I do not think I have the energy to put on a dress and make small talk with Brenda and her social circle. I think I just need to stay in bed." Kendrick immediately tightened his grip on my shoulder, leaning in close. His eyes locked onto mine, projecting a terrifying imitation of loving urgency. "Baby, isolating yourself is the absolute worst thing you can do right now," he insisted, his tone dripping with patronizing authority. "Sitting alone in this big house with your thoughts, is only going to make your anxiety worse. Getting dressed up, getting out of the house, and being surrounded by family who loves and supports you is exactly what you need. It will be good for your mental health to be around people. Please just do this for me. We will leave early if it becomes too much. I knew exactly what he was doing. The gala was not about getting me out of the house for my mental health. It was the final grand stage for his ambush. He wanted me surrounded by his people, isolated in a room full of his family, where he and Wyatt could corner me and execute their trap under the guise of an emergency intervention. He needed me at that country club to finalize the theft. I looked back up at him, let a look of absolute defeat wash over my features, and nodded slowly. "Okay," I whispered. "If you think it will help, I will go." Kendrick beamed, kissing my forehead with triumphant satisfaction. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed me the engraved invitation to his own public execution. The ensuing week was a masterclass in psychological endurance. I spent my days primarily confined to the master suite, maintaining the illusion that I was barely holding my reality together. I stayed in my pajamas until noon, left half-finished cups of coffee scattered around the kitchen, and frequently apologized for losing my train of thought mid-sentence. Kendrick was practically giddy. The closer we got to the weekend, the more his barely concealed arrogance began to bleed through his caring husband facade. He hummed cheerfully while making breakfast. He spent hours in his home office talking on the phone in hushed, excited tones. He looked at me not with the concern of a husband, but with the greedy, impatient eyes of a man staring at a winning lottery ticket that was about to cash out. While he thought I was sleeping away my depression, I was actually locked inside my secure encrypted digital network, actively monitoring every single financial and communication tripwire I had established. And it was during the middle of the week that Kendrick's hubris reached a level of delusion so spectacular it almost defied logic. Because Kendrick and Wyatt fully believed their forged power of attorney and the impending psychiatric hold were completely bulletproof, they began operating as if my $500,000 decoy account was already theirs. They had already spent the money in their minds, and Kendrick simply could not wait until Monday to start flexing his newfound wealth. On Wednesday afternoon, a high-priority alert flashed across my secure financial monitoring dashboard. I opened the encrypted notification and stared at the screen in sheer disbelief. Kendrick had just initiated a massive, reckless financial transaction. He did not just browse luxury car websites. He walked into an exclusive high-end imported auto dealership in Buckhead and put down a massive, non-refundable deposit on a custom-built matte black sports car valued at $150,000. He wanted to drive it straight to the country club gala on Saturday night to show off to his fraternity brothers and Brenda's elite social circle. He wanted to pull up to the valet stand looking like a triumphant titan of industry. But because he did not actually have access to my business account yet, and because his own credit was completely destroyed by his hidden crypto losses, he had to secure the vehicle using a predatory high-interest bridge loan from a deeply questionable secondary lender. I traced the digital paperwork of the loan and actually laughed out loud in the empty bedroom. The terms of the bridge loan were absolutely catastrophic. It required a massive balloon payment to be settled within 14 days, accompanied by an astronomical interest rate. Kendrick was already $300,000 in the hole to violent, unregulated loan sharks. And instead of using his stolen windfall to immediately save his own life, his first instinct was to take out another terrifyingly dangerous loan just to buy a flashy sports car to feed his enormous ego. He was so utterly convinced that he would be draining my account on Monday morning that he was willing to chain himself to another anchor just to look rich for the weekend. His arrogance was entirely blinding him to his own vulnerability. He was dancing on the edge of a cliff, completely intoxicated by his own perceived brilliance, totally unaware that the ground beneath his feet had already been removed. I watched the approval for the bridge loan clear on my monitor, confirming that the dealership was preparing the vehicle for a Friday delivery. Kendrick was going to get his shiny new toy just in time for the party. He was going to spend the next 48 hours feeling like the undisputed king of Atlanta. I closed the monitoring dashboard and quietly shut my laptop, letting the silence of the house wash over me. I was going to let him enjoy his new car. I was going to let him put on his tailored tuxedo, drive his stolen victory lap, and walk into that country club feeling like a god. The higher he climbed, the more devastating the impact would be when I finally shattered the glass beneath him. Kendrick was not the only member of the Sterling family actively spending my money before they had actually stolen it. While I sat in my darkened master bedroom, watching my husband chain himself to a predatory auto loan, my secure encrypted inbox pinged with a fresh intelligence report from my offshore legal syndicate. The forensic accountants had been continuously monitoring the financial activities of the entire family network, and they had just flagged a massive, terrifyingly arrogant transaction initiated by Wyatt and Keisha. Wyatt was standing on the absolute brink of total professional annihilation. His law firm partners were currently tearing his escrow ledgers apart, and he was days away from a federal indictment for embezzlement. Yet the unshakable delusion of his old money privilege drove him to maintain his wealthy facade at all costs. The report detailed a $50,000 purchase made at an ultra-exclusive appointment-only jeweler in the Buckhead district. Keisha had selected a blinding custom-designed diamond necklace as the ultimate showstopper gift for Brenda's 60th birthday gala. Because Wyatt had drained every last drop of his actual liquid assets, he had financed the diamonds using a brand new, highly leveraged line of credit. The repayment terms were incredibly aggressive, but Wyatt and Keisha did not care. They had already factored my decoy business account into their monthly budget. They fully expected to hand Brenda that necklace on Saturday night, look like the wealthiest, most generous children in Atlanta high society, and then quietly pay off the massive credit balance on Monday afternoon, the very second Kendrick seized control of my company. They were buying diamonds with the proceeds of my impending psychiatric imprisonment. The sheer breathtaking entitlement of it all made my blood run absolute zero. They were not just greedy. They were treating my destruction as a convenient financial bailout for their own gross incompetence. The true depth of the family rot revealed itself on Friday evening, the night before the Grand Country Club Gala. Kendrick had insisted on hosting an intimate family dinner at our estate to kick off the celebration weekend. He wanted to show off his matte black sports car, which was now gleaming ominously in our circular driveway. When Wyatt, Keisha, and Brenda arrived, the atmosphere in my home was electric with their unearned, premature victory. I played my part flawlessly. I wore a drab, oversized cashmere sweater, left my hair unstyled, and sat at the far end of my own dining table, looking entirely hollowed out. I barely touched my catered food, staring blankly at my water glass, while the Sterling family celebrated around me. Kendrick was holding court, loudly bragging about the horsepower of his new vehicle and the brilliant investments he claimed were finally paying off. Wyatt sat across from him, swirling a glass of my most expensive bourbon, wearing the smug, relaxed smile of a man who believed he had just successfully orchestrated the crime of the century. Keisha was practically vibrating with excitement, repeatedly tapping her designer handbag, where I knew the $50,000 diamond necklace was securely hidden. But it was Brenda who truly anchored the toxic energy in the room. She sat at the head of the table opposite Kendrick, completely ignoring my presence, basking in the glow of her golden sun and her aristocratic son-in-law. She looked like a queen surveying a conquered kingdom. About an hour into the dinner, I excused myself from the table, claiming my head was pounding, and I needed to get a fresh bottle of water from the kitchen. I kept my posture slumped, and my steps deliberately slow, playing the heavily medicated, exhausted mother. I walked into the sprawling marble kitchen, grateful for a brief moment of silence away from their celebratory laughter. A few seconds later, the sharp, authoritative click of expensive heels echoed on the hardwood floor behind me. I turned around to see Brenda standing in the kitchen doorway. She held a crystal wine glass in one hand, her posture impeccably rigid. The polite, superficial smile she usually wore for the sake of appearances was completely gone. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated, predatory malice. She slowly closed the distance between us, her heels clicking methodically, until she was standing just inches away from my face. I shrank back slightly, pressing my lower back against the marble island, letting her believe I was intimidated. Brenda leaned in, her expensive perfume suffocating the space between us, and dropped her voice to a vicious, quiet whisper. "You look absolutely dreadful, Camille," she hissed, her tone completely devoid of any maternal warmth. "It breaks my heart to see you struggling so deeply, but we all know you never really had the constitution for this level of success. It is simply too much pressure for a girl from your background." I kept my eyes downcast, letting my hands tremble slightly against the marble countertop. "I am just tired, Brenda," I murmured, keeping my voice fragile. "You are more than tired, sweetheart," she replied, her voice hardening into a terrifying, triumphant purr. "Your mind is failing you. We can all see it. But you do not need to worry your pretty little head anymore. Kendrick is finally stepping up as the true head of this household, exactly as he was born to do. He is going to take over all those heavy, complicated business burdens that are currently crushing your fragile brain." She reached out and placed a cold, perfectly manicured hand over mine, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. "And do not you worry about my grandson," she whispered, her eyes flashing with a dark, terrifying certainty. "I am going to take very good care of little Leo while you are away getting fixed. It is for the best, Camille. You are going to go to a nice, quiet facility where you cannot hurt yourself or anyone else, and Kendrick is going to raise that boy exactly how a Sterling should be raised." The air in the kitchen went completely still. The puzzle was finally horrifyingly complete. Up until this exact second, I had assumed Brenda was merely a toxic, enabling bystander. I thought Kendrick and Wyatt were keeping the ugly criminal mechanics of the psychiatric hold to themselves, shielding the family matriarch from the felony wire fraud and the forced medical kidnapping. I was wrong. Brenda was not a bystander. She was 100% in on the plot. She knew exactly what was going to happen to me on Monday morning. She knew about the facility. She knew about the plan to steal my company. She knew they were going to rip my 1-year-old son out of my arms, and she was actively cheering for my destruction. She was looking forward to erasing my influence so she could mold Leo into another hollow entitled Sterling Golden Boy. Every single adult sitting in my dining room was a willing, active participant in my execution. The chilling realization did not break me. It liberated me completely. Any microscopic, lingering shred of guilt I might have harbored about destroying an entire family was instantly incinerated by the absolute malice in Brenda's eyes. They were not just arrogant thieves. They were a synchronized syndicate of monsters who viewed my humanity as a disposable obstacle. I looked up at Brenda, widening my eyes to feign absolute terrified confusion. I let a small, pathetic sob catch in my throat. "I just want to feel better," I whispered, playing the broken victim flawlessly. "You will, Camille." Brenda smiled, patting my hand with mocking sympathy. "You will have all the time in the world to rest." She turned around and strutted back into the dining room to rejoin the celebration, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I stood motionless against the marble island, staring at the empty doorway. The performance was exhausting, but the endgame was officially locked into place. Tomorrow night was the grand gala. Tomorrow night Brenda would wear her stolen diamonds, Kendrick would parade around in his stolen sports car, and I would burn their entire kingdom to the bare blackened earth. The tires of Kendrick's new matte black sports car crunched against the pristine gravel of the Buckhead Country Club. The valet rushed forward, opening the door with practiced deference. Kendrick tossed the keys with an arrogant flick of his wrist. He was practically vibrating with unearned triumph, his chest puffed out under his tailored tuxedo jacket. I stepped out of the passenger side, keeping my head slightly bowed. My shoulders slumped under the weight of a designer shawl I used to hide my posture. The night air was thick and humid, but the ice running through my veins kept me perfectly grounded. We walked through the towering double doors of the clubhouse, stepping into a grand ballroom that was a masterpiece of Southern high society excess. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over hundreds of guests. Waiters in crisp white jackets glided across the polished marble floors, carrying silver trays of expensive champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. A live jazz quartet played a smooth, low-tempo melody in the corner. This was the Sterling family's natural habitat. I saw local politicians, prominent judges, generationally wealthy real estate developers, and legacy fraternity alumni mingling near the open bars. The room was absolutely dripping with false grandeur, a glittering monument to wealth built entirely on lies. Kendrick placed a firm, possessive hand on the small of my back, guiding me through the thick crowd. He played the role of the devoted, protective husband flawlessly. He leaned down to whisper fake words of encouragement into my ear, kissing my cheek for the benefit of the onlookers, while actively steering me away from anyone who might engage me in an actual coherent conversation. He wanted me visible to his peers, but completely isolated. I was nothing but a fragile prop in his grand narrative, the crumbling wife he was so valiantly trying to hold together. Across the room, I spotted Wyatt and Keisha holding court near a towering, intricately carved ice sculpture. Wyatt looked like a quintessential corporate titan. He was laughing loudly at a joke told by a city councilman, swirling his signature glass of bourbon, radiating absolute bulletproof confidence. To the untrained eye of the Atlanta elite surrounding him, he was the picture of legal and financial success. But I looked at him and saw a dead man walking. I knew about the panicked emails currently sitting on his law firm's secure servers. I knew about the catastrophic internal audit that was tearing his escrow ledgers apart. He was standing on a trapdoor, totally consumed by his own arrogance, completely unaware that the lever had already been pulled. Then the crowd parted slightly, and Brenda made her way toward the center of the ballroom. She looked like the undisputed queen of the city. She wore a floor-length emerald silk gown that commanded immediate attention, but it was the jewelry that stole the breath of everyone around her. Resting heavy against her collarbone was the custom-designed $50,000 diamond necklace Wyatt and Keisha had purchased on a highly leveraged line of credit. It caught the light of the crystal chandeliers, sparkling with a blinding, aggressive brilliance that demanded to be noticed. Brenda touched the diamonds constantly. She made sure every single guest she greeted had a clear, unobstructed chance to admire the extravagant gift from her loving, successful family. She paraded around the room accepting compliments with a practiced fake humility, boasting loudly about how incredibly blessed she was to have children who could afford to spoil her so thoroughly. The sheer intoxicating irony of the moment almost made me break my fragile character and laugh out loud right there in the middle of the ballroom. She was wearing stolen glass. Every single facet of that diamond necklace, every horsepower of Kendrick's matte black sports car, and every drop of expensive champagne currently flowing into the glasses of their guests was funded by the anticipation of my forced psychiatric imprisonment. They were literally wearing their crimes. They had financed this entire illusion of royalty using the collateral of my sanity. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter, taking a slow sip as I surveyed the room. The Sterling extended family was entirely consumed by their own mythology. They believed they had won the ultimate game. They thought this lavish gala was the coronation of their new untouchable financial dynasty. They did not notice the heavy, inevitable ticking clock echoing beneath the smooth jazz music. They could not see the invisible laser sights currently painted directly on their chests. I glanced at my discreet wristwatch. The emergency ex parte custody order securing my son was locked in a judge's chamber. The algorithmic traps on my bank accounts were fully armed and waiting for a single unauthorized keystroke. My offshore legal team was monitoring the situation from a secure war room, and the federal agents I had tipped off were currently mobilizing their strike teams just miles away from the country club gates. Kendrick tightened his grip on my waist, pulling me abruptly out of my thoughts. He leaned down, his breath hot against my ear. "My mother is about to make her welcome toast," he murmured, his voice tight with a sudden, barely suppressed adrenaline. "Wyatt needs to speak with us in the private lounge down the hall for just a moment. Family business matters, baby. It will be very quick." I looked up at him, letting my eyes widen in manufactured anxiety, allowing my bottom lip to tremble just a fraction of an inch. "Okay," I whispered obediently, clutching my shawl tighter around my shoulders. The final act was officially beginning. I let him take my hand and lead me away from the sparkling lights, the jazz music, and the glittering crowd. I walked willingly with my husband down the quiet, carpeted hallway, heading straight into the dark antechamber where they planned to deliver the final fatal blow. The heavy mahogany doors of the private executive lounge clicked shut behind us, instantly severing us from the smooth jazz and the clinking champagne glasses of the ballroom. The sudden silence in the room was heavy, dense, and suffocating. Wyatt was already waiting for us. He was standing by a long, polished conference table in the center of the dimly lit space, illuminated only by a few brass wall sconces. He had a thick manila folder resting under his perfectly manicured hand. He was not smiling. The warm, aristocratic charm he usually wore like a second skin was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, predatory stare that stripped away decades of his polished Southern gentleman facade. Kendrick released his firm grip on my waist and took a deliberate step away from me. He moved to stand shoulder to shoulder with his brother-in-law, aligning himself with his true partner in this betrayal. They positioned themselves between me and the heavy mahogany doors, physically blocking my only path back to the glittering safety of the gala. I stood near the center of the room, clutching my designer shawl tightly around my arms. I kept my chin tucked low, forcing my breathing to remain shallow and erratic. I was committed to playing my part until the very last possible second. Wyatt did not offer me a seat. He did not offer me a glass of water or ask how my headache was. He simply picked up the manila folder and slammed it down onto the hard surface of the table. The sharp, violent smack echoed off the wood-paneled walls like a gunshot. "Take a look," Camille Wyatt commanded. His voice was stripped of its usual faux polite drawl. It was sharp, aggressive, and dripping with absolute contempt. "We are done playing games tonight." I slowly walked forward, my hands trembling with a perfectly rehearsed fear, and looked down at the document spread across the polished wood. The first page was a highly detailed clinical psychiatric evaluation bearing the official watermarked letterhead of a prominent private behavioral health facility located just outside the city limits. It was signed and stamped by Dr. Evans. The diagnosis at the bottom of the page was printed in bold, undeniable letters. Severe postpartum psychosis with violent ideations. The document declared me an immediate catastrophic threat to myself and my infant son, stating I required immediate involuntary commitment for an indefinite period. Right next to it sat a legally binding, fully notarized power of attorney. The legal jargon was dense, but the intent was crystal clear. It transferred total irrevocable control of my business assets, my bank accounts, my intellectual property, and my medical decisions directly to my husband. I let out a soft, manufactured gasp, bringing my hand to my mouth as if I were hyperventilating. I looked up at Kendrick, channeling every ounce of betrayal and terror a normal, unsuspecting wife would feel in this horrific moment. "Kendrick, what is this?" I whispered, making my voice tremble perfectly on the edge of a sob. "What are you doing to me?" Kendrick did not flinch. The mask of the caring, supportive husband evaporated completely into the humid Atlanta night air, leaving behind nothing but raw, unadulterated greed and profound arrogance. He looked at me as if I were an insect he was about to crush under his expensive leather shoe. "It is over," Camille Kendrick stated, his voice flat, clinical, and devoid of any human empathy. "You are sick, you are completely unhinged, and everyone out in that ballroom knows it. We made sure of it. They have been watching you unravel for months. We have a private ambulance parked right now at the catering service entrance out back. 2 orderlies with a stretcher and chemical restraints are waiting for my signal." Kendrick took a slow, menacing step closer, crowding my physical space to assert his absolute dominance over my reality. "You have exactly 2 choices tonight," he continued, his eyes locked onto mine with absolute malice. "You can pick up that pen sign, the power of attorney, voluntarily, and walk quietly out the back door to get the mental help you desperately need. If you do that, I will make sure you are comfortable at the facility. I will make sure they treat you well, and maybe eventually, after you are cured, you will get to see Leo again." He leaned in, his breath hot against my face, his voice dropping to a vicious, threatening whisper. "Or you can refuse to sign. If you refuse, the orderlies come through that door. They will strap you to a gurney in a straitjacket, inject you with a heavy sedative, and drag you out of this country club, kicking and screaming in front of every single important person in Atlanta. You will be declared permanently, legally insane. And I promise you, Camille, if you make me do it the hard way, you will never see our son again. Choose right now." Wyatt crossed his arms, staring at me with a sickening, victorious smirk. They fully expected me to drop to my knees. They expected me to sob uncontrollably, to beg for mercy, to plead for my baby boy. They waited for the total psychological collapse they had spent months meticulously engineering. They thought they had backed a terrified, exhausted animal into a corner with no escape route. I looked down at the forged documents. I looked at the expensive silver pen resting on the table. Then I let out a slow, steady breath. I dropped my hands to my sides. I stood up perfectly straight, rolling my shoulders back, and instantly shedding the fragile, hunched posture I had been carrying for an entire week. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. I let the designer shawl slip from my shoulders, pooling silently onto the plush carpet at my feet. I smoothed the front of my silk dress with calm, deliberate precision, erasing any sign of distress. I raised my head and looked directly into Kendrick's eyes. The manufactured terror was completely gone from my face. My expression was colder than absolute zero. Kendrick frowned, a tiny flicker of confusion briefly crossing his arrogant features. He expected a broken victim, but the woman standing in front of him had just transformed into a towering wall of ice. "You are not going to take my business, Kendrick," I said, my voice echoing through the quiet room with absolute shattering authority. "And you are certainly never going to see my son again." Wyatt let out a harsh, mocking laugh, stepping forward to tap the forged psychiatric evaluation with his index finger. "You do not have a choice, little girl," Wyatt sneered, trying to reassert his control. "I hold all the cards here. We own your reality now." I took a slow, predatory step toward the large floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the sweeping circular driveway of the country club. I did not break eye contact with my husband. "Actually, Wyatt," I replied, my tone perfectly surgical and devastatingly calm, "you do not even hold a deck. I want you both to turn around and look out that window." Kendrick and Wyatt hesitated, their arrogant smirks faltering as the temperature in the room plummeted to match my tone. Driven by a sudden creeping sense of dread, they slowly turned their heads toward the glass. The dark manicured grounds of the country club were suddenly illuminated by a blinding rhythmic explosion of light. Dozens of flashing red and blue strobe lights were aggressively washing over the expensive cars in the valet line, piercing through the darkness and painting the walls of the antechamber with a frantic, terrifying urgency. A massive fleet of heavily armored federal vehicles and local police cruisers was aggressively pulling up the main driveway surrounding the perimeter and completely blocking every single exit. Kendrick and Wyatt stood absolutely paralyzed. Their faces were pressed toward the glass as the reality of the flashing police lights severed their delusions. I did not stay to watch the panic fully set into their eyes. I did not wait for them to beg to negotiate or to offer me desperate, pathetic apologies. I turned my back on both of them and walked out the heavy mahogany doors, leaving them trapped in the small antechamber with the inescapable realization that their lives were entirely over. I walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway and stepped back into the glittering expanse of the main ballroom. The contrast was staggering. The jazz quartet was still playing a smooth, upbeat melody. Hundreds of Atlanta high society guests were still laughing, sipping expensive champagne, and clinking their crystal glasses. Brenda was still holding court near the center of the room, her hand resting proudly on the $50,000 diamond necklace that she had bought with my stolen future. They were all completely oblivious to the hurricane of federal authority currently surrounding the building. I moved through the crowd with absolute, unshakable purpose. I did not look left or right. I walked directly toward the elevated stage where the live band and the sound engineer were set up. I climbed the short flight of stairs and stepped up to the audio control board. The sound technician looked at me with confusion, moving to block my path, but I locked eyes with him and used the commanding, unquestionable tone of a corporate chief executive. I told him to hand me the master auxiliary cable and the main microphone immediately. He hesitated for only a second before complying, stepping back and letting me take total control of the soundboard. I plugged the cable directly into the headphone jack of my smartphone. I stepped to the center of the stage, gripped the microphone tightly in my hand, and tapped the top of it twice. A sharp, high-pitched feedback whine cut aggressively through the smooth jazz music echoing loudly across the massive ballroom. The band stopped playing instantly. Hundreds of guests turned their heads, their conversations dying out, as all eyes locked onto me standing alone on the stage. Down on the floor, Brenda frowned, her perfect smile slipping into a mask of deep irritation at the sudden interruption. She opened her mouth, likely preparing to scold me for ruining her perfect gala. But I did not give her the chance to speak a single word. "Good evening, everyone," I announced, my voice booming through the state-of-the-art concert speakers with crystal-clear authority. "I know we are all here to celebrate the Sterling family legacy. Kendrick and Wyatt actually had a very special presentation planned for tonight, but I thought it would be best if we all shared it together right now." I looked down at my phone screen, selected the encrypted audio file I had captured from the nursery baby monitor, and hit play. I pushed the master volume slider on the soundboard all the way to the maximum limit. The high-definition audio blasted through the massive ballroom speakers. There was no static, no distortion, just the undeniable crystal-clear voices of Wyatt and my husband broadcasting to the entire room. Wyatt and his arrogant drawl echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "The forged psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Evans is already signed, sealed, and sitting inside the primary safe at my law firm right now. When the transport team arrives at your house on Monday, the paramedics will be holding a legally binding court-approved medical order." A collective horrified gasp rippled through the crowd of elite guests. Local politicians, wealthy developers, and prominent judges froze in their tracks, their champagne glasses halted halfway to their mouths. Then Kendrick and his cold, ruthless voice filled the room. "Once we commit her for severe postpartum psychosis, the temporary emergency orders will kick in instantly. I get full custody of Leo. She will be declared mentally unfit. I get total control of her business accounts. The company will be ours, Wyatt. All of it." I watched the color completely drain from Brenda and her face. The smug, arrogant glow she had been radiating all evening evaporated in a fraction of a second, but the recording was not finished. The entire ballroom listened in stunned, breathless silence as Wyatt asked about my son crying, and Kendrick delivered the final fatal blow. "Let him scream. He is barely a year-old, Wyatt. He is not going to remember any of this. I will just hand him off to my mother for a few weeks, until the dust settles and Camille is locked down permanently in the facility. I am absolutely not letting a crying baby get in the way of securing our future." The audio cut off, leaving a suffocating, terrifying silence in its wake. Brenda felt her grip completely fail. The expensive crystal champagne flute slipped from her perfectly manicured fingers and shattered violently against the polished marble floor. The sound of breaking glass echoed like a gunshot. Across the room, Keisha stood paralyzed in horror. She stared at the double doors just as Wyatt stumbled out of the hallway, his face drenched in a panicked, sickly sweat. Keisha let out a piercing, hysterical scream that shattered the remaining quiet of the ballroom. At that exact second, the main entrance doors of the country club burst violently open. The illusion of high society exclusivity was permanently destroyed as dozens of federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers flooded into the venue. They were flanked by uniformed Atlanta police officers moving with absolute terrifying precision. They did not care about the designer gowns or the elite status of the guests. They swarmed the ballroom with a commanding, lethal force. 2 federal agents immediately targeted Wyatt. He tried to make a desperate, pathetic break for the side exit, but they tackled him before he could take 3 steps. They slammed the wealthy, aristocratic lawyer face first onto a catered dining table, shattering porcelain plates and sending expensive appetizers flying across the room. As they wrenched his arms behind his back and secured the heavy steel handcuffs, an agent loudly announced his arrest for federal wire fraud, mass corporate embezzlement, and forging legal documents across state lines. Kendrick was standing frozen near the hallway entrance. He looked up at me, standing on the elevated stage. He did not look like the golden sun or the arrogant mastermind anymore. He looked like a terrified, pathetic little boy who had just been caught. Two Atlanta police officers grabbed him, twisting his arms roughly behind his back and locking the metal cuffs around his wrists. They read him his rights, citing criminal conspiracy, felony fraud, and attempted kidnapping. I stood completely still on the stage, looking down at the absolute wreckage of the Sterling family dynasty. The room was descending into absolute chaos, filled with shouting officers, screaming relatives, and stunned socialites frantically pulling out their phones to record the downfall. I did not shed a single tear. I just watched them drag my husband out the door in chains. The morning after the gala broke over Atlanta with a crisp, blinding clarity. The system Kendrick and Wyatt had so arrogantly tried to weaponize against my sanity was now grinding them into absolute dust. I did not attend Kendrick's arraignment, but my legal team provided a meticulous, highly satisfying recount of every single second. The golden son of the Sterling family stood before a no-nonsense federal judge, completely stripped of his tailored tuxedo and his unearned swagger. He wore a standard-issue county jail jumpsuit, his wrists shackled to a heavy chain around his waist. Kendrick fully expected his family name and his polite, charismatic smile to secure his immediate release. He was dead wrong. My attorneys had ensured the federal prosecutor was armed with the comprehensive dossier detailing his $300,000 debt to violent, unregulated criminal syndicates. The judge took one look at the financial report and recognized the stark reality. A desperate man owing hundreds of thousands of dollars to loan sharks who had just been caught attempting a multi-million-dollar heist had zero incentive to stick around for a trial. The judge slammed the gavel down and declared Kendrick a catastrophic flight risk. Bail was aggressively and permanently denied. The man who plotted to lock me inside a sterile psychiatric facility was dragged right back to his concrete cell, entirely trapped by his own greed. Wyatt experienced a destruction that was even more surgical and absolute. The internal audit at his prestigious law firm concluded with terrifying speed. The senior managing partners, desperate to shield their institution from the massive public fallout, handed every ledger email and forged document directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Georgia State Bar Association did not wait for a criminal conviction. They convened an emergency disciplinary panel and permanently stripped Wyatt of his license to practice law. The aristocratic Southern gentleman was officially disbarred in disgrace within 48 hours of his arrest. The federal prosecutors offered absolutely no plea deals. Armed with the unedited audio recording and a mountain of forensic accounting evidence, they indicted him on numerous counts of mass corporate embezzlement, federal wire fraud, and medical conspiracy. Wyatt was staring directly down the barrel of a mandatory decade in a federal penitentiary. The financial shockwave radiating from their arrests hit Keisha and Brenda with devastating, humiliating speed. Because Wyatt had systematically used stolen client escrow funds to finance his wife's lavish lifestyle, the federal government initiated an immediate total asset forfeiture. Every single bank account Keisha had access to was frozen instantly. Federal agents arrived at their sprawling Savannah estate with a fleet of moving trucks, seizing her designer wardrobes, her luxury vehicles, and the property itself. Keisha went from an untouchable, arrogant socialite to a completely destitute, targeted suspect overnight, forced to rely on public defenders to keep herself out of a jail cell. But it was Brenda who suffered the most spectacular, cathartic fall from grace. The $50,000 custom diamond necklace she had proudly paraded around the country club ballroom did not even last the weekend. Because Wyatt had secured that extravagant line of credit using entirely fraudulent financial statements, the boutique jeweler acted swiftly. They dispatched an aggressive repossession team, accompanied by local police officers, to reclaim the stones directly from Brenda's residence. The symbol of her ultimate high society victory was stripped away, leaving her with nothing but a bruised ego and a ruined reputation. The repossession of the diamonds was merely the opening act of Brenda's total ruin. Her sprawling brick mansion in the Cascade neighborhood, the absolute center of the Sterling family dynasty, and the stage for all her elitist garden parties, was completely hollow. It was standing on a foundation of massive unpaid debt. Brenda had been relying entirely on Kendrick to pay her multiple mortgages. She fully expected him to use my stolen business account to save her estate and fund her comfortable retirement. With Kendrick locked behind steel bars, Wyatt facing federal prison, and my offshore wealth completely out of reach, the bank moved with ruthless, unforgiving efficiency. The mansion went into immediate aggressive foreclosure. The prominent Atlanta social circles that Brenda had worshipped her entire life turned their backs on her, instantly treating the Sterling name like a toxic disease. Nobody answered her frantic phone calls. Nobody offered her a guest house to stay in. The woman who had sneered at my working-class background, the woman who had eagerly cheered for my forced institutionalization so she could steal my child, was forced to pack her meager remaining belongings into cheap plastic garbage bags. She was permanently evicted from the elite society she had desperately tried to protect, left with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of her own spectacular failure. The legal dismantling of my marriage was a swift, brutal, and entirely one-sided execution. With Kendrick locked in a federal holding facility facing a mountain of conspiracy and fraud charges and a violent syndicate of loan sharks waiting for him if he ever managed to make bail, he was completely defenseless. His highly paid defense attorneys had vanished the second his funds dried up, leaving him to rely on a perpetually overworked public defender. That lawyer took one look at my mountain of undeniable audio recordings, forged medical documents, and forensic financial evidence, and advised his client to surrender immediately. The family court judge did not even require a prolonged trial or mediation. Looking at the sheer depravity of a father willing to traumatize his infant son and falsely imprison his wife for financial gain, the judge finalized the divorce in absolute record time. I was granted full sole physical and legal custody of Leo, without a single stipulation, supervised visit, or shared holiday agreement. To guarantee that the toxic remnants of the Sterling dynasty could never cast a shadow over my child again, the judge approved a permanent ironclad restraining order. Kendrick, Brenda, and Keisha were legally and permanently erased from our existence. If they so much as stepped within 500 yards of my son, they would be thrown right back into a concrete cell. I did not stay in the Cascade estate. I packed up my son, my encrypted servers, and my peace of mind, and I walked away from that brick monument to my former husband's fragile ego. I let the banks and the debt collectors fight over the remaining equity Kendrick had recklessly leveraged to fund his fake millionaire lifestyle. I did not need a single penny from that tainted property. Instead, I finally unlocked a fraction of my offshore trust. Through an anonymous corporate holding company, I purchased a sprawling $5 million contemporary fortress, nestled deep within the heavily forested, ultra-secure hills of Sandy Springs. I paid for it entirely in cash. It featured state-of-the-art biometric security protocols, panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows, and a level of absolute unshakable privacy that the Sterling family could only dream of. I stepped out onto my massive limestone balcony as the sun began to set over the lush Georgia canopy, painting the sky in brilliant shades of violet and gold. The evening air was warm and deeply comforting. I held my 1-year-old son safely against my chest, feeling the steady rhythmic beat of his tiny heart against my collarbone. Leo rested his head on my shoulder, completely secure, thriving, and blissfully unaware of the absolute monsters his mother had to slaughter to protect his peace. I looked out over the sprawling, untouched acreage that I owned free and clear, and I let myself take a long, deep, victorious breath. Kendrick, Wyatt, and Brenda had looked at my quiet demeanor, my working-class roots, and my maternal exhaustion, and they saw a weak, fragile victim. They weaponized my dedication to my family and my company, utterly convinced that their country club pedigree and unearned confidence made them intellectually superior. They tried to break my mind, to shatter my sanity, to silence my voice, and to lock me away in a sterile, padded room so they could comfortably steal my crown. But their profound, blinding arrogance was their ultimate undoing. They severely underestimated the brilliant, relentless focus of a woman who built an empire from the ground up. By trying to orchestrate my destruction, they only succeeded in handing me the executioner's sword. I did not just survive the elaborate, terrifying trap they set for me. I used their own desperate greed to systematically dismantle their entire lineage. I stripped them of their wealth, their freedom, and their precious social standing, leaving them with absolutely nothing but the crushing, inescapable weight of their own monumental failure. The most profound lesson from this ordeal is that true power does not roar, it observes in absolute silence. When toxic people mistake your kindness for weakness and your exhaustion for fragility, they inevitably become blinded by their own arrogance. Never react emotionally to a calculated betrayal. Instead, use their underestimation of you as your greatest tactical advantage. While they are busy celebrating a victory they haven't earned quietly, secure your boundaries, gather your evidence, and build an impenetrable fortress. Survival isn't just about escaping a trap. It's about turning the trap back on the hunters with flawless, cold precision. If this story inspired you to protect your peace and reclaim your power, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own triumphs in the comments below.